A college student goes missing, her bike would be found, but would she ever be found? Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Jill Behrman. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new to the channel, I tell thrice true crime stories every week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok where I'm more known. I have around 3 million followers or so across 2 different pages. So if you want to follow that, it is in both of my TikTok pages are linked in the link tree in the description of this video below. And then one of the links will pop up here at some point in the beginning and at the end of the video. So follow if you like. In that link tree, you'll also find my merch store. We just have like t-shirts and hoodies and stuff. We do ship all over this entire world, so feel free to check that out too if you want to. And then lastly, if there is a case you want me to cover, just email me. My email is listed below. Just email me the name of the case or the individual, where it happened and when it happened, and then I can add it to my list. There are over 5,800 names on that list right now, so it may be a very long time before I get to that one, but I will eventually. I pick my cases at random, and so that's how it happens. But anyway, let's get into today's case. Jill Behrman was born on September 17th, 1980. And she was born in Bloomington, Indiana, which is pretty much where she would live her whole life. I believe she was one of 2 kids. I know she had a brother. When this case happened, Jill Behrman had just finished her freshman year, and that was over at Indiana University. She was working at the Student Recreational Sports Center. And I think she had a couple other small part-time jobs just to, make ends meet. Jill was a very intelligent young woman. She had graduated with honors from Bloomington High School, where she was awarded the Bertha Rogers Hinkle Memorial Scholarship. She got the Ross and Jean Mars Scholarship. She got the President's Academic Fitness Honors. She got the All-Conference Indiana Sports Award. She was very busy and very active in school, and she did a lot. She got very, very good grades, and she was extremely athletic. One of her favorite pastimes was bike riding. She was a bicyclist, but she also loved to hike. She loved playing volleyball. She loved to travel. And then whenever she could, she would go skiing. She loved to swim in her free time. She was always doing weightlifting. She took really good care of herself physically and mentally. And everyone would call Jill a very ambitious person who would always be able to attain any goal she set forth for herself. Another ambition of hers, her family would say, was that she strived to meet many new people, establish strong friendships and relationships, and become involved on her school's campus. She also wanted to be very involved in the community, as well as for herself internally, just kind of grow as a person. And she strived to be the best that she could possibly be in whatever her chosen profession would end up being. Jill Behrman clearly had a lot going for her, and she had an extremely bright future ahead of her. But somebody would steal that from her family, and the world. It was around 9 o'clock in the morning on May 31st, 2000. Like I said earlier, Jill was a bicyclist. I think she did marathons and stuff like that. And this is something she would do all the time. She would go out almost every morning and ride her bike. And that's exactly what she was doing that morning. Witnesses would later recount seeing her at the corner of Harrell Road and Moffett Lane. This was about 9:30 or so in the morning. And this is located in the southeastern Bloomington, Indiana area. And this, by all accounts, is the last time that anyone would ever report seeing Jill alive again. She was supposed to meet some family for lunch a little bit later that afternoon, but Jill failed to show up, which was extremely unlike her. She never, ever did that. Literally ever missed any kind of planned meeting, lunch, or appointment. And so her family became immediately very concerned about it. They waited a little bit longer, but when she still hadn't arrived home, they called police to report her missing. And so Jill's family and the community would essentially almost immediately begin a large search for the missing 19-year-old girl. There were several bicyclist clubs in that area, and because she was a part of that community, these clubs would go out and they would like map locations and paths and routes that Jill would have likely taken that morning, and routes that people were familiar with Jill taking, and they kind of did these grid searches that way, and they never found her or like her clothing or anything of her. They are searching through like fields. They are searching through all of the wooded areas. They are looking, as we always say, under every bush, under every tree. They are searching for her, but they're just coming up empty. About 2 days after she went missing, a local man goes to police to state that he thinks he may have found Jill's bike, and he found it the same day she went missing, but later that evening, around 5 p.m. that evening. He found the bike in like this sort of kind of cornfield type place, and it was just lying on the ground. There were no other signs of anything else. There was no sign of Jill. No blood, no sign of a struggle, just a bike. He didn't know about Jill's disappearance until 2 days into her search for her, and that's when he came forward to police. He showed police exactly where he found it. They did a big search of this field, and they came up with nothing. No more evidence. Obviously, this man is going to become a little bit suspicious to police because he's coming forward with this bike. Sometimes the killer or kidnappers will do that kind of thing. They'll inject themselves in the investigation to see where they're at, but also to do things like this to make them look like they're not guilty of anything if they're producing very significant evidence like this. As far as they know, they looked into this guy and they couldn't find anything on him to indicate that he had anything to do with what may have happened to Jill. As they're searching for her, they also have people like police conducting an investigation and interviewing locals and people in the area. And one person's name came up on their radar, a man named John Myers. John and his parents were actually interviewed in June of 2000. This is because he lived within a mile of where her bike was found. And witnesses would later tell police that they saw a vehicle kind of speeding away from the area where Jill's bike was found, kind of around the time, and the vehicle matched the description of what John Myers was driving. They also discovered that John Myers was on vacation from work on the entire week that Jill went missing. Witnesses would later tell police that around the day or so of and after Jill's disappearance, some people would notice that the windows on John Myers' bedroom or trailer had been covered up out of nowhere. Like they were never covered up, but suddenly they were. John Myers had also owned a shotgun that was reported missing, or they said was missing. I'm not sure if they actually reported it to police or not, but now they don't have Jill's body. They don't know if she had been shot or stabbed or if she was even dead, but this suddenly missing shotgun kind of raised some red flags too. Apparently he had said some very questionable things to people with regards to Jill's disappearance. Like, he kept bringing it up to people. He kept saying, I wonder where she is. I bet you she's in this wooded area. And he would tell people like, hey, if I ever kidnapped or killed someone, I would put them in this area. He would even point to directions like where he would hide a body, which is just a really bizarre thing to mention to anyone regardless. But at the time, police just didn't have any evidence to say that he actually did anything to her. So really, it's just kind of what people in the community are saying about him. And so they had to basically move on from John Myers because they still hadn't found Jill. The family has now put out flyers all over, not only this particular area, but they're putting flyers all over the state. They were trying to get Jill's name out there as far as they could to see if anybody has any information. Maybe someone had seen her. Maybe she got hurt, right? Maybe she hurt herself and she hit her head and she doesn't know where she is or who she is. And maybe, you never know. Maybe she's in a hospital somewhere. They go to hospitals, they look and they ask and they try to see if they have any records of anyone looking like Jill with certain types of injuries. No luck. So 3 days after the bike is reported being found, another witness comes forward to state that they think they found something that may have belonged to Jill. It was this little yellow radio with headphones, and it was just sitting nice and neat on a curb. This was at the parking lot of the Bloomington Church. When the radio was discovered, another witness saw a white truck backing away from the church and speeding away like crazy. They don't know if this was the person who left this radio there or not, but when the radio was brought to police, the family confirmed that that was Jill Behrman's radio. She used it on every bike ride. The location of these items is just weird. Like, they found the radio was not on the path that Jill would have likely taken. It would have been out of her way. The bike was like 10 miles away from any path she had ever taken before. So it's as if someone had just taken these items and just disposed of them wherever they could think. But where the items were found weren't necessarily where any kind of actual altercation or kidnapping, abduction may have possibly taken place. 2 days after Jill got reported missing, there would be a woman in a nearby town called Ellettsville. She was 18 years old, and she had gone to police because a man had tried to essentially abduct her. This guy in this black pickup truck drove up right next to her and just yanked her by the arm and tried to drag her into his car. He couldn't, and she managed to escape. And this happened just a couple of miles away from where Jill's bike was found. Police believe that these two incidents may be related. They also discovered another incident that happened in Bowling Green, Kentucky. A female cyclist was on her bike when suddenly she was struck by a car. And then a guy from this truck tries to pull her into the truck, but he doesn't succeed, and she gets away. A witness had actually been present at that scene, and he actually helped chase away this person who was possibly trying to kidnap this girl. They got a pretty good image of him, or got a pretty good look at him, and they came up with this composite drawing of him, which is always just an unsettling image, but this is the image they came up with. And eventually police believed that this person may have connection to Jill's case, so they ended up putting his image on like the missing persons flyers for Jill. It becomes more increasingly likely that Jill Behrman was more than likely abducted by someone like this guy, or maybe this guy, that this was likely a very random occurrence, that Jill was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They also had another theory that Jill may have been, like one of the other potential victims, had been struck by someone, and she was knocked off her bike, and then she was abducted. But her bike really didn't have a significant amount of damage that indicates that she was like slammed into. So they thought, well, maybe she was taking a break, because she did do that. She would get off her bike and drink some water and take a rest. Maybe someone struck her on accident. Maybe this was a hit and run type thing. But the issue with that is where's her body? It could have been someone who hit her and then put her in, maybe the bed of his truck with the bike and everything, and then disposed of everything in different places, maybe. But that was kind of it. There was no other leads. They did get a whole bunch of tips from people, like hundreds of people called with any kind of tips, but they went to all of those tips and leads, and they investigated all of them, and they just couldn't come up with anything. And still, Jill hasn't been found. In around 2002, 3 women would come forward to police to state that they were in a vehicle, they were driving it, and they struck Jill Behrman with their car. These women then said it was all an accident, obviously, and they would take her, Jill, they wrapped her up in this plastic sheet, they tied her up, and they chucked her body in a nearby creek. And then they threw the bike and the radio and other places. But then one of the women would recant this entire story and said it was basically a lie. And after investigation, they did search this creek. They found nothing. They determined that these women, for whatever reason, were just bullshitting. And so they never charged these women with any charges in terms of lying to police. Then on March 9th, 2003, this is now 3 years or so after Jill Behrman's disappearance, there was what they described as an incomplete skeleton found. There was Like no skin left. This was just pure like skeleton. There was no clothing found on the body. There were no like knife marks on the bones. There was no indication that any bones had been broken. There was no indication on these skeletal remains that this person had been hit by a car. What the coroner did determine was that there were pellets found inside the skull, and there was a wound on the skull, which would indicate a very, very close contact wound from a shotgun. And so the cause of death was ruled as a homicide, and this was done through basically a shotgun placed directly against her head and pulled the trigger. Through dental records, they would discover that this was the remains of 19-year-old Jill Behrman. They determined that the body was likely put there after she had been killed, and that's where her body fully decomposed. And so she was obviously shot somewhere else. This brings police back to a man they had interviewed back in 2000, John Myers. If you remember, he reported having a shotgun that went missing from his home. Well, Jill had been shot with the shotgun. When they go back and they interview people with, around John Myers, now after the body has been found, other witnesses state that on the date that Jill had gone missing, John Myers appeared to be really, really like out of sorts, distressed. He seemed like scattered, and he was saying he needed to get out of town. According to his aunt would tell police that John said he did something bad and he needed to get away. He told his aunt that he's afraid that he would be blamed for the murder of Jill Behrman. This was before anyone even knew she was murdered. He apparently had also been heard saying, well, they haven't found her body yet, again, before she was found. Other friends and family would state that John was overly paranoid about roadblocks all of a sudden, like where people, like police would question people. They did determine that the type of shotgun that was used to kill Jill was likely a 12 gauge, and that was the exact type of shotgun that Mr. Myers owned. That shotgun, by the way, has never been located. John reportedly would bring up the case of Jill to a lot of people randomly over the years before her body was found. He just kept bringing it up and talking about it. And that always struck people as a little strange because he didn't know her. He was also in jail for unrelated crimes. And I guess he had told a correctional officer that, he says he feels really bad for what happened to Jill before anyone knew she was dead. John had also told people, if you remember me saying earlier, he said, well, if I ever had to like murder or hide a body, I would do it in this area. And that area where he reportedly had pointed to and told his friends to is the exact same area where Jill Behrman was found. He told his grandma one time, essentially, that his dad took to the grave, because his dad had died in the interim, about what happened to Jill, indicating that he may have known what happened to Jill, that his dad knew about it. His dad had died after the fact. And so there's all these things of like, well, did John Myers kill her? His dad knew about it. His dad then died. And then John had no more witnesses, I guess, to this. And maybe he felt comfortable to get away with it at that point. So when police finally bring him back in for questioning, now after the body has been found and after they have talked to all of these friends and family who have all told police about these odd things he has said, there needs to be said that at that point there is no actual physical evidence connecting him to her murder. None. He was driving a similar vehicle that had been seen driving away from certain locations, yes, but they didn't know if that was his vehicle or not. There was no fingerprints anywhere. Obviously, this is just skeletal remains. The radio they found had no fingerprints. The bike, I guess, had no fingerprints. The bike and the radio had no physical evidence on it at all. There was no, male bodily fluid found at this point because, again, she had decomposed completely. And so they didn't have that either. They had no hair. They had nothing physical to connect him to it. So most of the evidence, all of the evidence really, was circumstantial and things that witnesses had told them. So John Myers was arrested and charged with the murder of Jill Behrman. And by 2006, he has gone to trial. And on June 30th, 2006, he is found guilty of the murder of Jill Behrman, and he is sentenced to 65 years in prison. A couple of things that came up was that there was this belief that the police, once the body was found, They really rushed the investigation. They circled back to John Myers because he just sort of fit the bill. Then they had all these bizarre things he allegedly said to people, and they just quickly arrested him based on that. John Myers always said he didn't do it. He has never acknowledged to police or in the trial. He never confessed. He never indicated himself directly to people, like investigator-wise, that he did this. I guess his defense was really shitty. Like, they didn't really call any significant witnesses. They didn't challenge a lot. They didn't really put in a lot of effort to defend Mr. Myers. I was reading that John Myers, the jury that was at his trial, was apparently not sequestered really all that great. They were allowed their cell phones. And I guess they were allowed to get drunk. They were like allowed to drink and mingle. And so there was like this belief that they were getting, and they were also allowed to watch like television, which is not, you're not supposed to do that. There's this belief that maybe his jury had seen things or heard things that wasn't talked about in the trial that would have also convinced them of his guilt. And so over the years after his conviction, I think at one point in 2015, he went to the appeals court and they said, nope, your conviction stands. Then in 2019, a federal court reviewed the case and they ended up vacating his conviction. And this was because his legal counsel sucked, did not give him a proper defense, and there were issues with what the jury was allowed to do. And so they essentially overturned the conviction, but said you have 120 days to release him from jail and then charge him again if you so choose. The prosecution stated almost immediately, we're going to retry him. Then in August of 2020, the U.S. Court of Appeals would look at the conviction that was overturned. They reversed the overturning of the conviction. They said that yes, he did not receive the greatest of legal counsel, but the jury issue was actually okay because their verdict was based on evidence presented at trial. And so they reversed it, and then his initial conviction was now upheld again. And then in 2021, they would try to go to the United States Supreme Court, but they denied to even hear his case. And so John Myers is now serving his 65-year prison sentence for the murder of Jill Behrman. This is one of those where I don't know. According to witnesses, he said a bunch of crazy things. That missing shotgun, the exact type of shotgun was used to kill her. He pointed in the direction of where her body was eventually found, but it's all circumstantial. There's no physical evidence. So it's like, is that really a good conviction? This is one of the, I just don't know. Like, I don't know. It's all circumstantial, and it's weak circumstantial evidence. It sounds like he did it, but there's nothing there to say with concrete proof that he did. So it's like, do they have the right guy? I'm not sure. I want to say they do, but I don't know. And so now you're left with, did Jill Behrman get the justice she deserved? According to the state of Indiana, they got their guy. But if I'm on this jury, right, and I have the evidence they have, even though I feel like he's probably the right guy, I don't know if they would have convinced me physical evidence-wise or any evidence-wise that he actually did it. They didn't really have any other viable suspects. The guy who found the bike, they apparently cleared him. She didn't have any, like, jilted exes, or she didn't have any altercations with people. We know that she had been deliberately shot in the head. So this was a murder. This was not a hit and run like there was theories about. So those women that said they hit her and all that, we know for a fact now they didn't do this. We know she wasn't hit by a car. We know she was shot. And then we know she was dumped in a field. Her bike was then dumped in a different place. Her radio was dumped in a different place. So this was a murder, and intentional murder. But what was the motive? I mean, we don't know if anything was stolen because she wasn't found until 3 years later. We don't know if this was a sexually motivated crime because she was too badly decomposed to even know if that's the case. She wasn't found with clothes on, but that could mean that maybe animals got to her and just sort of kind of took the clothes, off the skeletal remains and kind of scattered them. So what would John Myers' motive have been? I mean, likely, if this was an abduction off the side of the road, likely, if he did this, this was a sexually motivated crime, and she probably was sexually assaulted. but they just don't know that for certain. Cases like this always just kind of, they bother me because it's like, I can't say whether or not they got the right guy. What do you guys think? Do they have the right person? I mean, there's no other suspects. He talked about it a lot, according, if you believe his family and friends. And so hopefully Jill Behrman is resting in peace, and hopefully she got the justice that she very rightfully deserved. But that's actually it for this case. True crime or Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe if you're into true crime. Follow me over on TikTok if you want to. Check out the merch store. Recommend a case to my email address. All of that info is below in the description. And that's it. That's it. Let's finish this video with a chuckle, because these videos are always sad. So let's tell some really bad dad jokes. I don't trust stairs. They're always up to something. Why didn't Han Solo enjoy his steak dinner? Because it was chewy. What's the best thing about Switzerland? I don't know, but their flag is a big plus. Singing in the shower is all fun and games until you get soap in your mouth. Then it's a soap opera. A blonde walks into a bar. She never saw it coming. Why don't you ever see elephants hiding in trees? Obviously, because they're too good at it. Well, that was stupid. I hope you got a chuckle. Clearly I did. I was laughing a lot that whole time, right? Yeah. Anyway. Fuck. Ouch. Bye-zy poopsies. Bye, poopsie boopsie. Bye. 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 Hi. 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 Bye. Hi.